Hey, Pawn family, welcome back to another great episode of the Pawn Leaders Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And on this episode, I have somebody who I think is going to serve you so well. In the Pawn Leaders Podcast community, I ask questions about what is the biggest struggle that you're having. And one of the biggest struggles is hiring good talent to work in your stores. So my guest, Scott Wintrip, is the author of High Velocity Hiring, How to Hire Top Talent in an Instant. Named a must-read book by SHRM's HR magazine, over the past 19 years, Scott has led the Wintrip Consulting Group, a global consultancy that has helped more than 22,000 organizations build talent-rich companies. That's incredible, Scott.
Thank you.
That have eliminated their hiring delays forever. For 5 consecutive years, Staffing Industry Analysts, a Crain Communications company, awarded Scott a place on the Staffing 100, a list of the world's 100 most influential leaders. He's also a member of the $1 Million Consultant Hall of Fame and was inducted into the Staffing 100 Hall of Fame. Scott, welcome to the episode.
Thank you so much. I've been so excited to have this conversation with you.
No, I found a friend of ours who's been on the show before, Antoine Dupont, who's in a community of ours, Heroic Public Speaking, hold up your book and saying, how he's so excited to read this book about hiring. And I thought to myself, this is a big issue pawnbrokers are having today. Hiring good talent, holding on to good talent. And so I thought you're the perfect person to be on the podcast. So thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm excited to serve this community of yours.
Awesome. So let's talk about a little bit of your history. How did you get into consulting in the hiring and culture arena?
Oh, it was all part of the lifelong plan. I planned this from the okay, that's bull. So look, here's how it started. In college, I was a music major. And I'm sure you immediately see the connection between music and hiring.
Oh yeah, it's pertinent. Yeah.
So a friend of mine would show up at happy hour on Fridays, flush with cash. And we would go to this place in Kent, Ohio. I went to Kent State University. It was called The Loft. And we went there because it was cheap beer and cheap pizza, $5 for each. And this dude was always buying because we had no money. And so I asked him, I said, where are you getting this money? He says, I've got this great job through a temp agency. And they pay me every single week. And all I got to do is put stuff in boxes. I'm like, dude, I can do that. So I show up at this temp agency and I didn't get the job because I didn't want the job. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but they planted a seed. The woman behind the desk, she said to me in her gravelly voice, she said, hey, honey, have you ever thought about a job in this industry? And I looked at her and I went, industry? Putting people in jobs, pimping people out for work. That's what I thought at the time. I was a college kid. That's an industry. I didn't know that. I left. I wasn't real happy as a music major. I was supposed to be in a practice room 4 hours a day. As you can kind of tell, I'm a little social. So I don't do alone that well. And I just thought, this is such a cool profession. And it planted a seed. And not long after that, I joined my first employment firm, helping people find work. Because I thought it was noble. Just like a friend of mine is a pawnbroker, and he believes that this profession is very noble in the population it serves. And I think it's true. It serves a need within a niche. That's the same thing in hiring, is I serve a need within a niche. So I had a career in that, and I finally realized that I need to take my expertise to a broader audience. I not only need to serve these employment agencies, but I need to serve companies as well, because I figured out a way to hire and fill jobs the moment they open. So, it was serendipity. I never planned on being the guy that changes hiring, but that's who I've become. And it was quite by accident, because I pioneered a way for a big, big problem that you already talked about, and that is finding people, but it also takes way too long to fill jobs. And that's what I do in my consultancy today. So it was a happy accident.
Awesome. So you went from the temp agency to essentially creating this way of people hiring faster and filling the positions. Let's talk about the pawn community. I was in the industry for 16 years. A lot of the pawnbrokers aren't paying as much as a Silicon Valley job, right? And it's hard to keep employees because sometimes team members don't see this as a career. A lot of people these days don't say, God, I want to be a pawnbroker the rest of my life. So you have turnover, you have some of the bigger companies who do very, very well. So what are some strategies that you have in the book that you wrote, High Velocity Hiring, to bring on capable employees to do a great job?
I think the best strategy that I can share with people is you make history repeat itself. I bet most people listening to this, if they've been a pawnbroker for any period of time longer than a year, they've probably come across people who have been better employees than others. There's things about those employees that we can have repeat themselves. That's the history. So here's the key. If the brokers listening to this look for the recurring patterns, they will make better hires. Not only will they make better hires for when it comes to people who do quality work, but they'll find people who want to work within the industry because those are the patterns as well. And by the way, I resonate with this. People who are in staffing and recruiting, the agency side of the business, virtually none of them grow up saying, I want to be a recruiter someday. It just doesn't happen. You know, it's, you and I were talking before the podcast, there are certain industries that have a perception issue. And recruiting does. Recruiting has a terrible reputation. 70% of hiring managers and HR folks often see agencies and recruiters, where I grew up in the business, as a necessary evil. You know, these are people who, they're stealing people from one company and putting them into another. That's not a highly respected profession. And I think a number of industries are clearly misunderstood. So, and I think pawn's one of them. I have a dear friend who's a pawnbroker. We've talked about this in detail. So, you know, we have to find people who are, you know, willing to join an industry that might have a bit of a reputation that's probably not well-deserved, and have a good work ethic. So where do we find that? As I said before, we look for the recurring patterns. So if people just have a grid, and the grid has a couple sections to it. One is the recurring patterns of behaviors that showed up among the successful people, and also the recurring skills, the recurring personality traits. And you just look for those patterns among the successful hires. Then you also look for the patterns of negative traits and behaviors among the people who failed in the job. You just have those two sections, and you look for those good traits in the people you potentially hire, and you avoid the bad traits. We not only find people who have the skills that we're looking for, we'll also find the personality types, people who are suited for the business. And that could be in any industry, including pawn. So the recurring patterns of success, the recurring patterns, the negative traits, and we avoid those. I call those deal makers and deal breakers. If we just look for those two things among all the people that have worked for us, and we look for those recurring patterns, we now go in and we're hiring with our heads, not our hearts. And that's important because just like dating, hiring is an emotional decision. We got to get our hearts out of this. We've got to hire with our heads. We've got to hire based on factual evidence, proof that people can do the job, versus, you know, in an interview, it's kind of like a date. People make promises. Oh, I do good work. I can do that. I can do this. No, we need to look for proof, not promises. And we do that by looking for those recurring patterns.
Gotcha. So I'm thinking about the people who listen to the podcast, and a lot of them are single store owners. They are actually, you know, on the line doing the work, and losing a team member is tough. And so they have to go back. They have to put out the ads themselves while they're working. They're stressed out about the hours not being filled, the store not being staffed correctly. What do you recommend when it comes to that? When it's, shoot, I lost an employee. I don't have a lot of time to sit here and figure this out.
Yeah.
What do they do? I mean, they're worried, they're stressed, the customers aren't being served. Should they have a lineup of leads for staffing coming in? Should they just do that once they lose an employee? How does that work?
So the answer is yes. You asked me an or question, and I'm going to give you a yes, because it's both. The secret, and so let's create a distinction between the old way of hiring and the new way of hiring. It's just like the old way of buying things and the new way of buying things. You know, the old way of buying things is we place an order and we wait for it to show up, and it can take days or weeks. Now, with services like Prime Now, we can get a delivery within 2 hours. Or we can drive down to the local pawn shop. We can buy something right then and there. So we're used to now getting things in an instant. So the old way of doing things doesn't work anymore. It's just like the old way of hiring. The old way of hiring is you keep a job open until the right person shows up. And when you do that, as an owner of a pawn shop, you're doing 3 jobs at once. And you know this one. You're doing your day job, running the store. You're covering that open job, that's the second position, and you're conducting hours of interviews to fill that open position. 3 freaking jobs at once. No wonder pawnbrokers are stressed out. So you actually said it, Yigal. So we line up talented people, and then we wait for the right jobs to open. That's the new way of hiring. So we cultivate top talent, and we wait for the right jobs to open. So there's a 2-step process. For those who have an open job right now, you've got to fill that open job. So you follow that deal maker, deal breaker process to fill that job. Now, you want to cultivate talent. It's not that, you're looking to fire this person or add somebody better, unless they stink. You made a stinky hire. It's about life happens. That person's spouse may get a job in another city. They may need a leave of absence for whatever reason, or they may end up sucking as an employee and you need to replace them. If every pawnbroker watching and listening to this simply lined up 1 or 2 people who are always ready to hire, this changes the game. You go from days or weeks or months to fill a job to you pick up the phone, you call those 1 or 2 people when they show up tomorrow. Now, one thing I should mention as an aside, I almost always get pushback or a question of people saying, well, who in the world is going to be willing to do that when it comes to a job candidate? Who's going to be willing to wait for a job to open up? And the answer is lots of people. Smart, talented people give themselves options. They know that the job they have today could go away tomorrow. Yeah. So they believe in lining up options for themselves. So just like you're lining up options for yourself to hire, you're giving other people options. It's their irons in the fire, so to speak. And the smartest candidates are willing to do that. We do this now. We fill jobs. My book is How to Hire Top Talent in an Instant. High Velocity Hiring, How to Hire Top Talent in an Instant. This is how you do it. You don't wait until the job opens. You line up people before that job opens, and then you can fill it in that instant.
Awesome. So what comes to mind when you're saying that is just like marketing is an ongoing process, hiring needs to be an ongoing process. Yes. It's not something that you just kind of, I need to hire, that's what I'm going to do today. It's, you're consistently finding top talent. And when the job opens up, that's when you call those people, as opposed to jumping the gun and hiring so quickly that you get the wrong candidate, the wrong candidate, excuse me. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I'll jump in for a second. What you said is so important. It is a process. And when you do the process in the old way, it takes twice as long. Why does it take twice as long? Well, you're doing 3 jobs at once, and you're distracted, and you have all this going on. And so driving while under the influence of drugs and alcohol, bad idea. Hiring under the influence of overwhelming responsibility is also a bad idea. So we have these distracted pawnbrokers and distracted business owners making hires. And one of the reasons they don't work out sometimes is they hired while distracted. Versus if I can do it on my own terms, if I can invest 30 to 60 minutes a week, looking at resumes, posting jobs, having conversations with people ahead of time, I'm not stressed out. I don't have to hire anybody today. I can do this on my own terms. It takes half the amount of time to do it that way. We've measured it. And I do it from a place of being present and not stressed out. And I'm doing it on my terms. So you said the most important word here is this is a process. And that's what I did in my book, is I outlined this process. And you mentioned the number. We've rolled this out at 22,000 organizations now of all sizes. And while all kinds of companies benefit from this, I actually think the small businesses in particular have benefited the most, because when an open job occurs in a small business, you feel it more, because everybody's dealing with so many different hats and responsibilities.
Yeah. It's especially true when you have, one of your managers leave for some reason, or somebody who's such an important part of the team. A lot of times the owners think, God, what am I going to do? I can't go on vacation now. I can't get anything done because it takes so long to train a pawnbroker. But if you're hiring top talent who are great managers and you just have to show them the pawn way, it'll be a lot easier.
I would agree with that. And you take me back to the profile again, this is where we can, again, look for the recurring patterns. So we can look for the patterns among the people who have been good retail associates, who are behind the counter, working in pawn, who've then been the teachable people who I can give a career path to be a manager. What were those recurring patterns among those people, those unteachable skills? And what are the things that I'll need to teach those individuals? If I have all of that in mind, when I roll out the idea of the pawn way of doing things, and I show them that there's a career path here, and I find those people, I'm potentially hiring an employee for life. I'm giving them a career path. You know, in a world where, especially in corporate America, nothing against corporate America, I do a lot of work there. Corporate America is one of these places where things are constantly changing. And you never know who's going to gobble up whom. My friend who's the pawnbroker has been a pawnbroker for decades. His store has always been the same size. He has weathered all of the economic storms. He has been one of the consistent players in the marketplace when everything else around him, when it comes to the signs on the banks and the corporations and their branding, all of that's changed. He's maintained the same. So I'm saying this because I think that small businesses, and that includes pawn shops, have a distinct competitive advantage where they can sell a career path to people. And it's just about getting the right people in the door. So that's why I go back to that hiring profile. We line up the right people based on previous evidence and offer them that career path. We not only make better hires, but we actually cut down on our hiring as well, because we've chosen the right people who are going to become those managers and the people that we groom over time. And now, if I've done that, if one of my managers leaves and I've hired an associate who can become a manager and I've been grooming them for that, once again, I've filled that manager job in an instant.
And I think one other thing that I'd like to add to that is the preconceived notion of the pawn shop. If pawnbrokers are out in the community, they're giving back, they're adding to the identity within the community, right?
Yeah.
And putting positive notions to it, then it's going to open pawnbrokers up for better talent. Right? I mean, if you just put out an ad that says looking for a pawn shop and you are a horrible pawnbroker in the community, no one's going to want to come work for you. But if you are...
Sorry, you're making me excited. You want to finish it? Because I think I might blow everybody's mind by taking it a step further.
So I just wanted to say that, you know, and I say this on the podcast many times, you have to be a positive influence in the community and in the industry in order to get great hires coming in through the door, great talent wanting to walk through your shop. And we've had some incredible pawnbrokers on this show who have 12 stores and 15 stores and 8 stores who have incredible talent because they are those people in the community. Now, please blow our minds, Scott.
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean I was, my mama taught me better than that than to interrupt. But here's one of my favorite parts about this system, and it goes hand in hand with what you said, is if you want to recruit good people, you have to run a good business.
Yes.
And you have to serve your community, and you have to be good in the community. So I suspect, well, I'm betting most, if not all, of the people who listen to this podcast are those people, because, you know, you only want to get better at what you do if you're already good at what you do, is my experience. So, you know, podcasts like this one tend to draw high caliber people. So we've got the right people here. So if you're running a good business and you're active in the community, one of the best things you can do to make sure you make the right hire, but also attract good people and help them get rid of preconceived notions, is conduct a different kind of interview. And it's called an experiential interview. So the problem with a typical interview, a traditional interview, is candidates are on their best behavior. They do what I call the tell, sell, and swell. They tell you what they think you want to hear because they're trying to win the job. They're selling the very best parts of their background, and they're trying to swell your ego. Just like in dating, if you think about it, that's what goes on in dating, the tell, sell, and swell.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. It's not that people are being deceptive when they do that. It is normal that people put their best selves forward. The problem is this interferes with making a good fit because we're not seeing the whole person. So I look for proof, not promises. Proof is when somebody shows you they can do the job. So that's where an experiential interview comes in. And if the listeners and watchers write down 3 words: see, hear, experience. That's how you conduct an experiential interview. You see the candidate in action doing sample work. You get to hear how that person will fit in around customers and colleagues, and you experience the quality of his or her skills. So you literally have the person try on the job. Now, this isn't work for compensation. We can simulate customer interactions. We can, do this outside of regular hours, and we can have somebody play the role of customer. It could be an employee or it could be a friend. And you have a scenario where this potential hire has to interrelate with that prospective customer. So you get to try them on because they can't fake their skills. They either have them or not. But now they get to try on the job. They get to see what it's like to be behind the counter. They get to have a normal interaction that you set up in this simulation. And some retailers in particular will actually pay candidates to come in and work for a couple hours. You can choose to do that. So it's real life. And look, if you're running an ethical pawn shop that is doing good work for your customers and doing good by the community, the candidate's going to see that. So that's why I got really excited is, seeing is believing. And when you talked about being out in the community, you're allowing people to see you so they can believe you're a good person and doing good work. It's the same thing in hiring. Seeing is believing, where there's a candidate who might have worked in other parts of retail, so they have that transferable skill you might be looking for. They've handled cash before, they've done customer interaction, but they're a little gun shy about pawn. And then they come in and they see the value that's provided. They see how this store serves the community in so many different ways, from becoming a bank for people who can't get to a bank or can't, won't do business with a regular bank, or buying and selling of goods. They see this and they experience this. And the people who are passionate about that, they've got a firsthand experience. So that's why I got excited. Seeing is believing, and proof is priceless is what I say all the time. So when you're dating each other in that way, it's no different than dating your future spouse. You get a real experience of that person. You're going to get a real experience of this person, and they get to experience the job. And if they say yes, it's based on true firsthand knowledge, not talking about the job and what it might be like.
Yeah, I agree with you. Last week, actually, in the Mastermind, the Pawn Leaders Mastermind, we had a big conversation about hiring. And one of the members suggested to another member, he said, you know what? Don't do a 30-minute interview. Do a 3-hour interview where 30 minutes is question and answer and looking at the resume. And the other 2.5 hours is pay them to be out on the floor and see how amicable they are to the clients, how they work with other people. Are they going to try to help? Are they going to try to make a sale? How do they speak with the clients? And that's how you see if they're working or not. And with that said, Scott, I would love for you to come into the Mastermind group for a guest appearance at some point.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, to talk with the guys.
So you've got people with common sense in your Mastermind group. And I know that sounds, I just said something so obvious. My experience is common sense isn't all that common, or it's not applied in all situations. This is common sense, and this is how I discovered experiential interviewing. I got so desperate interviewing a salesperson 30 years ago that I finally, because I was getting it wrong half the time. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I got to try something different. So I had this salesman who sold telecom equipment, and I was in this big office building, and I knew a bunch of people. So I found 3 people he could sell to, because I thought, well, if I watch him in action, I'll know for sure. And I did. I followed him around. He sold. He loved it because he had 3 leads. And thank goodness I did, because I didn't hire him. He was one of the worst salespeople I'd ever seen. But on the telephone, oh my gosh, this guy had all the right answers, said all the right things. When he got in front of buyers, he interrupted them constantly. And so he was on his best behavior. This was my epiphany. It was like, why haven't I done this before? This is common sense. And I just had to figure out from there how to apply it to all kinds of different roles. So kudos to whoever said that. They are spot on. And the only thing I would say is, when you get really good at this maybe takes an hour and a half for a retail associate. It doesn't take long when you can see somebody in action. They either fit the job and have the skills, or they don't. And you can see it for your own eyes.
Love it, man. So you wrote a book on this, and I do want to go over kind of the biggest mistakes that you see in the hiring process that doesn't have to do with what we spoke about so far. What are, 1 or 2 of the biggest mistakes that small business make when it comes to hiring?
So Yeah, there's a bunch. I'll tell you a couple that really come to mind, top of mind. So number one, big mistake is that people blame the skills shortage. There's not enough quality people to go around. And in researching my book, one of the things I discovered is those kind of negative mindsets keep you from changing things for the good. So, it's often said that there are lots of jobs and not enough people to fill those jobs. When you focus on that, those numbers are deceiving. You're not trying to fill all of the jobs, just your own. And when looked at in that perspective, there are always more people available than the number of jobs you have because you're not filling all of the jobs. And that change in mindset helps people fix their broken hiring processes. And we looked at some research. There's a researcher by the name of Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, and she's an expert on the impact of emotions. And she found something very interesting. She found that positive emotions cause people to have more creative behavior. Negative emotions actually interrupt their creativity. So that's why blaming the skill shortage or any outside influence is such a problem. When you think the odds are stacked against you, your negative emotions kick in, and this is where you suddenly feel powerless, and you think you can't solve the problem. Of those 22,000 organizations I talked about, almost all of them, their change from taking forever to fill jobs and not filling some to filling them in an instant always started with this mindset change. They stopped focusing on the fact that there truly is more talent than there are jobs. They focus on the fact that they have just their jobs and there's always more than enough people, and now they focus on where to find them. They get creative. So that's the first thing, is we have to change counterproductive mindsets. The second thing I would say is I think the mistake is that people try to make it more complicated than it really is. When I rolled out this process that we talked about today, and it's just as simple as we've talked about, when it breaks and I have to go back and help people fix it, they've always made it more complicated. And that's kind of human nature. If you look at our tax code, for example, it grows every year. Last time I checked, it's over 6 million words and growing.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's more masterful complexity. Simple is sustainable is one of my mantras. So if we have a simple process where it starts with, yes, let's do a phone interview. But the phone interview, people are going to do that tell, sell, and swell. So I'm not going to truly evaluate their skills except for communication. I'm going to see how they interact with me. I'm going to see, how well they come across over the phone, because in a pawn shop, that pawn shop's going to get phone calls. And we need people who give good phone. So I will evaluate that. So if I like the communication skills, then I'll bring them in. I'll think of the sample work. I'll base the sample work on that hiring profile, that grid I talked about. And I will set up a simple scenario. I'll watch them in action. If they have every one of those deal makers, those must-haves, and none of those deal breakers, I'll hire that person. But when people make it complex, when they start, for example, negotiating with themselves, where they look at it and the person has a complicated life, and that's one of the deal breakers on the list, and they negotiate with themselves, wow, I really like them. Those hires never work out. It's just like in dating. Before I met my wife, I met a wonderful woman by the name of Molly, and she had a deal breaker. It happened to be a complicated life. And, I negotiated that away for 6 months, and it was not it was a complex relationship. Her complicated life started making mine complicated because I wanted to negotiate away that one thing. Well, it's one important thing. It's the same thing here. If we follow this simple process and we don't waver from it, we're going to make good hires every single time. So I would say those top two, those big ones is we've got to have a positive mindset that doesn't blame outside influences, and we've got to trust the process. We've got to stick with this process and follow it through every single time. If we avoid those two mistakes, hiring is simple, and it's fast, and it's effective every single time.
Love it, man. You've been incredible. You've been an incredible guest on the podcast.
Thank you.
I actually want to give away 5 of your books, High Velocity Hiring. So if you're in the Pawn Leaders podcast community, when this episode drops, just say, I want High Velocity Hiring in a comment, and I'll put you into like a little raffle to see if you win the book. Scott, it's been amazing having you here. I want people to go check you out, scottwintrip.com, and that will be at the show notes. Also, your book is on Amazon, correct?
That is. Yep,
So
sure is.
go check out High Velocity Hiring on Amazon. Scott's as you can tell in the last 25 minutes, he's giving us so much value on how to hire. And it's one of the top issues that pawnbrokers are having today. So just like Scott said, if you're listening to this podcast, you want to become better, you want your pawn shop to become better, and this is the way to do it. Go out there, read, learn, and improve. So it's been a pleasure, Scott. For those of you listening, don't forget to check out the Pawn Leaders Podcast community on Facebook. And Scott, I look forward to having you in the Mastermind group to give us a little more detail on how to do this.
Sounds good. I look forward to meeting your community. If they're anything like you and you're passionate about this, I can't wait. You're doing such important work, and your community's lucky to have you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Scott. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Till the next episode. Take care.